Everyone knows the name Titanic, but here's the part almost nobody talks about. Titanic wasn't alone. She had two sister ships, Olympic and Britannic. They were built side by side in Belfast. The goal was simple: outshine the rivals with size and luxury. One would be celebrated as the ship magnificent, another would vanish in wartime, and all three would carry stories of both triumph and disaster. In fact, Olympic received Titanic's distress signal that night, but she was just too far away to reach her, and one woman would survive brushes with fate on all three ships. Their shared beginnings in Belfast would shape everything that followed. Imagine Belfast in the early 1900s. Inside the Harland and Wolff shipyards, steel frames stretched skyward side by side, while thousands of workers hammered rivets into place. These were the Olympic-class liners, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, designed by Thomas Andrews and Alexander Carlisle. Work began in 1908, with Olympic launched in 1910, Titanic in 1911, and Britannic following in 1914. Together, they were meant to dominate the Atlantic, not through speed, but by sheer scale and luxury. The White Star Line had decided not to chase Cunard's speed records. Instead, they wanted to overwhelm passengers with space and splendor. These weren't racing machines. They were floating hotels. Lavish dining halls, sweeping staircases, and rows of cabins dressed in polished wood and chandeliers sold the dream of comfort and power. From the river's edge, the three ships looked like siblings carved from one blueprint. 4 funnels, long straight decks, and towering profiles that made rivals seem dated the moment they sailed. Built side by side, their designs and reputations would be inseparable, for better and worse. Take those funnels. 4 funnels meant strength in the public imagination, so the designers gave them 4. But in truth, only 3 vented engine smoke. The 4th stood as a symbol, chosen mainly for symmetry and grandeur, though it served a secondary purpose as a ventilation shaft. It was a calculated decision. Give passengers the show of power, while quietly covering for the need to move air around the ship's bowels. And then there were the famous watertight bulkheads. The Olympic-class liners had 15 transverse bulkheads slicing the hull into compartments, with heavy steel doors that could, in theory, seal off flooding. On paper, it was brilliant, promising safety and resilience. But here's the snag on Titanic and Olympic. Those bulkheads only rose as far as E-deck, just 1 or 2 decks higher in certain compartments. That meant if enough forward compartments filled, the sea could spill over the tops like water jumping between glasses. It looked like a guarantee of safety, but it had a flaw baked right into the design. So how did such confidence turn brittle so fast? Part of the answer lies in appearance. Passengers trusted these vast silhouettes and grand interiors because they looked invincible. The size, the symmetry, the polished detail, it all inspired belief that nothing could bring them down. But that sense of security was as much marketing as engineering, and cracks in the illusion would only become visible when disaster struck. And while structure and steel played their part, safety equipment was another story. Because if the ships looked too safe to fail, what did that mean for the lifeboats? This is where the story twists into what people call the lifeboat paradox. Each Olympic-class liner could accommodate up to 64 lifeboats, but Titanic and Olympic were fitted with only 20 during construction, roughly a third of their capacity. For ships that claim to be pinnacles of modern safety, that choice looks staggering. The reason wasn't technical failure, it was image. White Star Line wanted its decks to feel like wide, open promenades where wealthy passengers could stroll and admire the sea without bumping into rows of bulky boats. Too many would obstruct the view and ruin the sleek silhouette. Think of it like walking into a grand hotel lobby filled wall to wall with fire extinguishers. You'd feel less like you were entering luxury, more like you'd stepped into an accident waiting to happen. White Star preferred charm and calm over blunt reminders of risk. But another factor gave them cover: the rules. At the time, British Board of Trade regulations were based on ship tonnage, not passenger count, and Titanic technically met those legal requirements, so owners were free to stick with the minimum. By law, she looked prepared, even if the lifeboat numbers fell hopelessly short for her actual capacity. That gap between legal and safe became one of the most glaring flaws in maritime design history. Then the disaster came, and everything flipped overnight. The shock of Titanic's loss forced immediate changes. Olympic, still in service, was rushed into refit. Lifeboat drills became routine, and her decks filled with extra boats until she carried double what she had before. The same company that once hid lifeboats now flaunted them because public confidence demanded it. Passengers no longer felt reassured by smooth outlines and empty railings. They wanted to see survival equipment ready and waiting. Britannic, the youngest of the trio, carried those lessons from the start. Her builders fitted 8 massive gantry davits, 6 along the boat deck and 2 at the stern, each one capable of handling multiple boats at once. The design meant lifeboats could be swung out quickly to either side, even if the ship developed a dangerous list. They looked like scaffolding, overbuilt compared to her sisters, but this time function beat form. Her lines admitted openly that appearances no longer mattered more than survival. That's the essence of the lifeboat paradox. The ships were marketed as unsinkable, yet their safety gear was deliberately kept to a minimum. Only catastrophe forced changes that should have been obvious from the beginning. And if you look at what still lies beneath the waves today, you can see those choices marked in steel, preserved for anyone willing to study the wrecks and the stories they still whisper. Secrets on the seafloor tell a different kind of story. 2 wrecks remain as silent evidence: Titanic, shattered in the deep Atlantic, and Britannic, lying far more intact in the bright shallows of the Aegean. These sisters went down in different ways, yet what they left behind continues to shape how we remember them. When Titanic was finally tracked down, the world learned just how violent her end had been. Her wreck was located on the 1st of September, 1985, by an expedition involving Jean-Louis Michel and Robert Ballard during what was partly a classified United States Navy mission. She lies at roughly 4,000 meters down, about 2.5 miles, where crushing pressure and cold have taken a terrible toll on her structure. Great sections of the hull are broken apart, debris trails stretch across the seabed, and the ship lies divided into 2 main pieces. For decades, people only imagined her shape below the waves. Once cameras revealed it, every collapsed corridor and twisted railing looked like a frozen moment of failure. But the damage was so immense that key details of her last moments may never be recovered. Britannic, discovered earlier in 1975 by Jacques Cousteau, tells a strikingly different tale. Her wreck sits in far shallower waters where sunlight still flickers through, leaving her tilted on her side but still largely whole. You can swim along her hull and still make out her vast outline, propellers, and superstructure. The contrast is stark. One ship torn into fragments, the other a ghostly but recognizable survivor. Depth and environment made all the difference. Titanic's resting place is dark, corrosive, and crushing. Britannic rests in clear seas where time has been kinder, allowing her to preserve her shape. Design changes also mattered. After Titanic sank, Olympic was quickly refitted. Bulkheads were extended higher, in some cases up to B deck, and the double bottom was lengthened. These hard-won upgrades were built into Britannic from the start. When she struck disaster, those stronger bulkheads slowed the flooding and gave most people time to escape. Even today, her wreck shows evidence of those what we fixed choices: higher partitions, improved sealing, and lifeboat positions ready for use. And yet her fate still carries a question mark. Officially, Britannic struck a mine on the morning of the 21st of November, 1916, while serving as a hospital ship. Over 3,000 people were aboard, yet only 30 lives were lost, a low toll compared to Titanic. Still, analysis of the damage allows some to argue a torpedo is possible. The official verdict stands, but the faint possibility of sabotage or attack keeps the debates alive. Each dive brings new scans, new images, and plenty of speculation. In the end, Titanic shows us collapse. Britannic shows us survival with mystery. Together, they highlight not just tragedy but also how design, environment, and chance decide what the ocean keeps. And that brings us to the bigger picture, how these ships, built as giants of pride, ended up remembered as warnings. These 3 great liners began as symbols of ambition, built to showcase confidence in steel and engineering. Yet their endings could not have been more different. One lost on her first crossing, another taken in war, and the last remembered for both endurance and change. They began as steel monuments to pride, and ended as warnings the ocean won't let you forget. For example, Violet Jessup, who worked aboard Olympic, survived Titanic and later survived Britannic, embodied the eerie human thread that ran through this family of ships. So which sister hits you hardest? The glory, the tragedy, or the near misses? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more history that hides in plain sight.